The Houston Medical Technology Summit had run for 11 years, without a moment anyone in the industry would call unforgettable. This was the year that changed. Dr. Vanessa Reed was 33 years old and had been on the cover of 2 healthcare innovation magazines in the same calendar quarter. She was leading the pre-demonstration press walkthrough of the exhibit floor when she paused near the credentialed attendee check-in desk. A man had just collected his badge and was turning toward the main hall carrying a Pelican case that had been through enough field work to have the paint scuffed down to bare plastic at the latches, a hairline crack along the handle mount sealed with black electrical tape. She said it with the ease of someone accustomed to being overheard, that she hoped whoever was bringing that relic in hadn't scheduled time near the calibration suite, because the instruments inside were probably last certified before her company filed its first patent. The people nearby laughed, the quick, reflexive kind. The man with the case didn't look up. He took his badge, clipped it to his shirt pocket, and walked toward the floor with the measured pace of someone who has heard that particular register of laughter before. Enough times that it no longer required a response. Robert Callum was 48 years old. He had been carrying that case for 6 of them. There had been a version of Robert Callum who walked into conference halls like the Westfield Convention Center and felt at home. Who knew the layout of the exhibit floor before the maps were printed, because he had been one of the people consulted during the planning stages, who had his name in the acknowledgments of 3 peer-reviewed calibration studies, and whose work sat, quietly, at the foundation of how a generation of biomedical engineers thought about diagnostic measurement accuracy. He had spent 12 years as a senior calibration engineer and then lead technical director at Meridian Medical Systems, one of the largest diagnostic equipment manufacturers in the country. He was not someone who appeared in press releases or sat on interview panels. He was someone who made things work with a precision that other people's careers were built on. The framework that had defined most of that career, a multi-stage calibration validation protocol he had developed over 18 months of research, late nights in the lab, and a particular stubbornness about getting the error margins right, had been published in the Journal of Biomedical Engineering under his name. He had made it open access because he believed the methodology should be available to anyone who needed it. He had not imagined what someone might do with that openness. The formal end of his tenure at Meridian came from a regulatory audit. A batch of imaging calibration records had been improperly archived, not falsified, improperly formatted, the difference significant in practice and invisible to a press cycle that needed a narrative. The records belonged to a compliance process that had been transferred to his department 6 weeks before the audit, without the documentation to support the transfer. His name was at the top of the department. The audit report required a responsible party. His employer, facing a substantial penalty review, provided one. He contested it. The process took 8 months, cost most of his savings, and concluded with a settlement that restored his professional certifications but not his position, and not the consulting contracts that had dried up while the proceeding was ongoing. His wife Eleanor had been sick through most of those 8 months. She was diagnosed 14 months before the audit and died 11 months after it, on a Thursday morning in April, in the bedroom of their house in Katy, Texas, with Robert sitting beside her and their daughter Clara asleep on the couch down the hall. Clara had been 6 years old. She had her mother's way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard about something, and she had her father's tendency to go very quiet when things around her became complicated. Robert built something small and functional from what remained. He did freelance calibration work, device verification, instrument qualification, field accuracy assessments for mid-sized hospitals and outpatient imaging centers that couldn't justify a full-time biomedical engineering staff. He drove a truck with a sun-faded hood and a dent in the rear quarter panel he had been meaning to fix for 2 years. He made Clara breakfast before school every morning, picked her up every afternoon, and had a standing arrangement with the woman 2 houses down who watched Clara on the days his work ran long. He kept the Pelican case in the back of the truck. It looked like it had been everywhere, which it had. Inside, each instrument in its molded foam cradle was a set of calibration tools he had assembled and maintained with the care a watchmaker gives to a movement. The portable reference analyzer, the thermal compensation module, the signal verification array. Each component selected not for how it looked, but for what it could actually do. And each maintained to a tolerance standard tighter than the manufacturer's specification, because Robert Callum knew what the components were doing and cared about the difference. He had not planned to be at the Houston summit. Philip Stern had called him on a Wednesday evening while Clara was at the kitchen table doing a worksheet about state capitals. Philip was a former colleague, now a regulatory consultant, who had been reviewing Clarity Diagnostics' technical documentation for a hospital procurement evaluation, and had found something in the performance validation section that bothered him. A calibration reference point in the AI diagnostic algorithm's accuracy claims appeared to assume environmental compensation values that didn't match the conference's published venue specifications. It might be nothing. It might be a documentation inconsistency. Or it might mean that the live demonstration, running in a building with a different thermal profile from the one the system had been validated against, would be operating with a baseline offset significant enough to affect the AI's output reliability. Philip didn't have the equipment to verify it himself. He asked Robert to come take a look and tell him what he was actually seeing. Robert said no. He said it again when Philip called Thursday morning. On Friday, Clara's school sent a note that the after-school program was closing early for a staff development day, and Robert was already rearranging his schedule when Philip called a third time. Robert looked at Clara across the table. She was coloring a map of the United States with careful precision, staying inside every border, and thought about what Philip had described. If the calibration baseline was off and the system was being demonstrated live, in front of hospital procurement directors and investors, someone in that room would eventually notice. He wanted to be the one who noticed it first. He took the invitation. He brought Clara because there was no one else, and told her they were going to a big building where people showed off medical equipment, which she absorbed with the focused attention she gave most things, then asked if there would be snacks. The Westfield Convention Center had glass walls that turned the Houston morning into something architectural. Clara walked beside Robert with her hand in his, wearing a yellow jacket and carrying the small backpack with the embroidered sun on it that she had chosen herself at the start of the school year. She looked at everything with the open curiosity of a child who does not yet know she is supposed to be somewhere else. The registration desk for credentialed technical attendees was staffed by 2 people who had clearly been briefed on what a credentialed technical attendee was supposed to look like. Robert did not match it. He was wearing a gray shirt that had been pressed that morning and had not survived the commute, and he was carrying the Pelican case and a canvas bag. The staff checked his confirmation code twice and consulted a secondary screen before confirming it valid. Philip had registered him properly. A young engineer from Clarity Diagnostics was standing near the entrance to the technical demonstration corridor with a badge that read Systems Integration. When he saw the Pelican case, he said something to the woman beside him. Low enough to be considered private, not low enough to be private. Something like, pretty sure that thing's a prop from a 1990s hospital drama. The woman covered a smile with her hand. Clara heard it. Robert felt her fingers tighten around his. He crouched down to her level on the polished floor and said quietly that they were fine, that they were going inside now, that she could stay right beside him the whole time. She nodded. already steady, already trusting him in the way that was the most important thing in his life. He tried to reach Clarity's technical team twice before the demonstration began. The first time, he spoke to a floor coordinator near the exhibit entrance and asked to be connected with whoever was managing the calibration baseline for the AI demonstration system. The coordinator took his name, said she would pass it along, and did not pass it along. The second time, he found Kyle Dodds, the systems integration engineer from the corridor near the technical access point, and told him directly that there was a potential thermal compensation issue in the demo environment that could affect the AI's output accuracy, and that he had equipment that could verify it in under 10 minutes. Kyle Dodds looked at the Pelican case, then at Robert's badge, then at his shirt, in that sequence, and said that the system had been through a full qualification run that morning, and everything had checked out. Robert said the morning qualification run had been completed before the HVAC system reached its operating temperature under a full attendee load, and that the baseline offset under current conditions could be running between 0.4 and 0.7 degrees in the thermal compensation module, which, at the AI's classification threshold, would push its false negative rate above the margin Clarity had published. Kyle Dodds said he appreciated the concern. Dr. Vanessa Reed came through the corridor at that moment, trailing the conclusion of a meeting and moving with the particular efficiency of someone who has 17 things to do in the next 90 minutes. She assessed the situation in the practiced way of someone who runs a company. A man with a worn equipment case and a child beside him having a disagreement with one of her engineers 4 minutes before the most important product demonstration in her company's history. She said it without visible malice, which did not make it land differently. She said that whatever equipment-related concern he had was best addressed through the technical support channel, and that she was happy to have someone follow up after the demonstration concluded. Robert looked at her. He said he had a valid technical credential, a specific concern about the calibration baseline, and that it would take less time to verify than the conversation they were currently having. Dr. Vanessa Reed's eyes went to the Pelican case. She said her engineering team was very thorough. Then she moved on, because the demonstration hall had 400 people waiting for her. At the edge of the corridor, Clara looked up at her father and then at the case by his side. She was 8 years old, which was old enough to understand the shape of what had just happened even without all the words for it. She put her hand back in his without saying anything. The main demonstration hall held 420 attendees and was full. The stage carried a display array of 6 synchronized screens showing Clarity Diagnostics' AI imaging platform in its pre-demonstration state. Clean white interface, soft blue diagnostic overlays, the kind of design that communicated precision at a glance. Robert was near the back with Clara seated beside him on the floor, her backpack open, her sketchbook out, colored pencils arranged by shade on the carpet beside her. She was drawing something with the focused seriousness she brought to everything. He was watching the technical monitoring station on the left side of the stage, where a secondary display showed the system's real-time performance metrics. He was watching the thermal compensation readout in the lower panel of that monitor, and what he saw confirmed what he had suspected. The baseline had drifted, not catastrophically, not in a way that would be obvious in the first 2 minutes of the demonstration, but the drift was present and consistent, and Robert had spent enough years with calibration instruments to know that a drift of that profile in an AI diagnostic system classifying imaging data against a fixed reference standard would not stay invisible. The demonstration began with Dr. Vanessa Reed's overview, which was genuinely impressive. She had a gift for making technical systems legible to people whose backgrounds varied by several orders of magnitude, and the room was attentive in the way rooms are when the person on stage has earned that attention. The platform's first 3 demonstration sequences ran cleanly. The 4th ran into something. It was a diagnostic sequence using a simulated patient dataset, chest imaging, a classification task the AI was designed to handle with what the company's validation data showed as 97.3% accuracy. The system's output came back with a confidence interval that was narrower than it should have been given the input parameters, and the classification marker sat at a position that was within the acceptable range by 0.2 percentage points. Most people in the room would not have caught it. Robert caught it. The platform's secondary monitoring interface, the one running on the technician's screen at stage left, had an alert function designed to flag anomalies for the engineering team during live demonstrations. It was a QA tool, not meant to be visible to the audience. It was, because of a display routing configuration that someone had set for the morning run and not reset, sharing its output with one of the 6 main stage screens. Robert moved to the side of the hall where the technical infrastructure panel was mounted into the wall, a standard junction used by AV staff and biomedical technicians for equipment connections. He opened the Pelican case. His portable reference analyzer had an interface port, compatible with the convention center's technical network architecture. He connected it and ran the calibration verification protocol he had written himself, the same one he used in hospital settings, designed to query a connected diagnostic system's active calibration state and produce a structured report of any variance from its published baseline. The protocol ran in 42 seconds. The report went to the technical monitoring interface. The monitoring interface, still mirroring to the stage display, showed it to the room. The white platform interface on screen 4 changed. A calibration status panel appeared. 3 fields: thermal compensation variance, 0.61 degrees, reference baseline offset, outside published tolerance, classification threshold margin, reduced. Below the fields, a single line of clinical text. Current system state does not match validated performance specifications. The hall went quiet in the specific way large rooms go quiet when what appears on a screen is not what anyone expected to appear. Dr. Vanessa Reed stopped mid-sentence. She turned to the display, then to the technical station, then, because she was someone who could trace a line of cause and effect quickly even under unexpected pressure, toward Robert Callum, who was standing beside the infrastructure panel with the Pelican case open at his feet and an expression that had not changed. Security reached him in under 30 seconds. Robert closed the analyzer. He did not move to leave. He said, at a volume that carried in the silence, "Your demonstration system is running 0.61 degrees outside its thermal compensation baseline. At that offset, the AI's false negative rate in chest imaging classification exceeds your published specification by a margin your hospital procurement clients would need to know about. I used a standard interface connection in a room full of credentialed biomedical attendees. I am not the problem you have." The legal response arrived in 3 minutes. 2 attorneys and the head of convention floor security. They asked for his equipment. He declined, politely and without raising his voice. He explained that he was willing to cooperate fully with any technical review, that his analyzer logs were complete and would show exactly what had run and what had been reported, but that his equipment was his property and would remain in his possession unless they had a legal basis for seizure, which, as working attorneys at a conference setting, they did not. Dr. Vanessa Reed came off the stage. The space around her and Robert cleared in the way crowds clear when people sense the real event is happening somewhere other than where it was scheduled to happen. She said that what he had done was an unauthorized connection to proprietary systems, and she intended to address it accordingly. Robert looked at her and said that the interface port was a standard biomedical network junction, that the connection was within the scope of his technical credential, and that the calibration query had produced an accurate report of the system's actual performance state. She said he should have gone through proper channels. He said, "I tried your proper channels. You pointed at my case and walked away." The words did not need volume. The people nearby were very still. Margaret Souza, Clarity Diagnostics Chief Technical Officer, 56 years old, with the company since its second year, came through the group and said they needed to look at the logs before anyone made another decision. She was the engineer the room turned to when the situation required someone who could think past the pressure, and she was already moving toward it. There was a man at the back of the room who had not moved since the display changed. Arnold Finch was 64 years old and had been evaluating medical technology investments for longer than most people in the hall had been working. He had read Clarity's FDA 510 submission documents as part of his due diligence review. When he saw the name on Robert's badge, he went still in the way people go still when two separate things in their mind suddenly become one thing. He made his way to Margaret Souza and said something quietly. Margaret's expression shifted. She went back to her station with a different weight than she had been carrying. What Arnold Finch had recognized, and what Margaret Souza was now pulling up in the system architecture documentation, was a citation in Clarity Diagnostics' FDA submission. The primary calibration validation methodology underpinning the AI's accuracy claims. The multi-stage protocol that defined how the system's reference baseline was established and how performance specifications were derived, was cited in the submission as the Callum calibration framework, published in the Journal of Biomedical Engineering, authored by Robert Callum. The company had built an AI diagnostic platform that hospitals were considering integrating into clinical workflows. The scientific foundation of its accuracy claims traced back to a methodology written by the man they had just told to use the support channel after the event concluded. Margaret Souza's team verified the calibration report in 8 minutes. The variance was real. The thermal compensation offset was 0.61 degrees. At that offset, the AI's classification threshold shifted by a margin that, in clinical practice, would have increased the false negative rate in the imaging class being demonstrated from 2.7% to 4.4%. Not a catastrophic number in isolation, a number that, applied across the volume of scans a hospital imaging department processed in a year, represented patients. A senior technician on Margaret's team read the analyzer log twice, and then said, to no one in particular, that if the drift had continued undetected through the full demonstration, the performance data the procurement directors had been observing would have been inconsistent with what the product would actually do in a clinical environment. She said it as a fact, because it was one. The second problem arrived from outside the building. Margaret Souza found it in the network monitoring logs 14 minutes after the display had changed. A series of connection requests from an IP address outside the convention center network, targeting the same biomedical interface port Robert had used. The requests were structured probe packets, formatted to test the diagnostic network's response to specific query types, escalating in complexity over approximately 17 minutes. Someone had been watching the convention center's network traffic and had identified the same open technical interface, and unlike Robert, they were not running a calibration report. Margaret brought it directly to Dr. Vanessa Reed. She showed her the log pattern. Vanessa looked at it for 5 seconds. The technical team had the skill to close the vulnerability. That was not the question. But they were working in a hall that still held most of its original audience, under press attention that had migrated from the product launch story to the incident story, and the combination of pressure and active network monitoring was producing exactly the kind of coordination problem that slows response time, when response time is what matters most. Dr. Vanessa Reed crossed the hall to where Robert was seated. Clara had fallen asleep against his arm. The backpack was on the floor beside his shoe. The sketchbook was open on his knee with a half-finished drawing of a tall building. All careful windows, that he had been holding while she slept. The disruption of the last hour had moved around both of them, and Robert had stayed in it, without leaving and without escalating, which was, Margaret Souza would think later, entirely consistent with the picture she was building of who he actually was. Dr. Vanessa Reed stood in front of him. The distance between who she had been in the corridor 40 minutes ago and who she was in this moment showed in the way she stood. She said, "There's active external probing on the technical network, same interface you used. We need it closed faster than my team can close it right now." Robert looked at her. It was not a quick look. He was reading past the surface in the way he read instrument outputs, for the actual data, not the display value. Then he said, "Margaret clears the demonstration network stack. Nobody touches my analyzer settings. And the stage mirrors go dark before I start. I won't run a diagnostic in front of cameras." Dr. Vanessa Reed turned and gave 3 instructions to Margaret. Margaret moved. It took 60 seconds to configure what he had asked for. It took Robert 8 minutes after that. He worked without narration, which was his way. The steps were methodical. Isolate the biomedical interface at the junction level, force a reference baseline reset. Using the analyzer's thermal compensation recalibration function, push a corrected baseline parameter to the AI platform's active calibration state. Verify the correction against the system's internal reference log, and run a monitoring pass to confirm the external probe packets had stopped receiving valid responses. When the external address registered a connection timeout and did not retry, Robert documented the timestamp, noted it in the analyzer log, and closed the case. He said, "Your calibration reference file was marked as static in the system configuration, but the thermal compensation parameter wasn't locked. Anyone who knew the interface architecture could query it. That's where the drift started, and that's what the external party was probing. Lock the parameter and require re-verification at each deployment site before any clinical demonstration. That needs to be in your setup protocol." Margaret Souza had her notepad out before he finished. Dr. Vanessa Reed went back to the stage. The room had stayed. The investors, the procurement directors, the press. They had stayed because they had watched a company encounter an unexpected technical problem in a public setting and wanted to see what the company would do about it. She stood at the front without notes. She had learned, at some point in building her company, that reading from a prepared statement in a genuine moment was the thing an audience remembered in the way you did not want to be remembered. She said, "The person who identified the calibration issue in this system today is someone I dismissed when he arrived at this building this morning. He tried to bring a technical concern to my team before the demonstration began. We didn't listen. He was right. I was wrong. Those happened to be the same thing here, and they needed to be said in the same room where the error was made." She said his name was Robert Callum, and she said it with the particular weight that names carry when a room has just come to understand what the name means. Arnold Finch at the back of the hall nodded once, slowly. Kyle Dodds stood against the wall and did not look at anyone. Robert heard his name from across the hall. He was checking a final log entry and did not look up immediately. When he did, his face was the one he wore for most things. Present, precise, not performing anything. The recognition moved through the room person by person, the way understanding moves through a group when people are quietly recalibrating what they just witnessed. The man who had been treated as someone who did not belong in this room was, in a technical and documented sense, one of the foundational authors of the system that had been demonstrated in it. The citation in the FDA submission was not a footnote. The Callum calibration framework was the structural basis on which the company's accuracy claims rested. The meeting room Clarity was using as an operational office during the summit had one window that faced the convention center's courtyard. Dr. Vanessa Reed asked Robert to speak with her privately. He settled Clara in a padded chair in the adjoining corridor with her sketchbook and pencils and a granola bar from the canvas bag before he came in. Dr. Vanessa Reed was standing when he entered. She waited until he sat. She asked him what he actually wanted, not as the opening to an offer, just the question plain. Robert looked at the window for a moment. He said, "Consistent work in a field I know. The flexibility to leave at 3:15 to pick up my daughter without it being something I have to negotiate every week. An environment where the person who finds a problem isn't treated as the problem, and people who tell the truth about what they don't know." He said it the way he said everything, as a description of a real situation, not a presentation of one. Dr. Vanessa Reed listened without interrupting. She asked after a moment why he hadn't returned to the industry in any formal capacity before now. Robert turned his head slightly toward the corridor, where Clara was visible through the glass. Pencil moving across paper, tongue pressed to her lower lip in concentration. He said, "When the ground has shifted under everything, and there's a kid who needs you to show up, getting through the week with something intact is the whole project. The industry felt like a problem I could look at later." She was quiet. She said she understood that. She said it plainly, without elaborating, which was the right way to say it. The offer came 4 minutes later. Director of Calibration Integrity. A new role she was creating because this afternoon had shown her it needed to exist. Full access to the engineering team. Technical authority on all performance validation before any product demonstration or clinical submission. Schedule built into the contract terms with no exceptions. Hard stop at 3:15. Initial term 6 months with a review she expected to lead somewhere longer. She also said, and Robert listened to this part most carefully because it told him something he needed to know about her, that she was implementing a formal technical escalation process. Structured, with designated authority, and with someone whose actual job was to hear what it produced and act on it. She was not describing a policy. She was describing a failure she had diagnosed in herself, and was choosing to correct in the structure she controlled. It was not a comfortable move. She was making it in the same room where the error had happened, without waiting to get further from the moment first. Robert said he would consider the offer. She said she expected that. 4 days later, Robert was at the corner table of the reading room in the Bellwood Branch Library, 2 blocks from Clara's school. The branch librarian, a man named Phil, who kept a French press behind the reference desk, and had never once asked Robert why he came in on weekday afternoons with a calibration analyzer and a laptop, had a standing arrangement that Clara could sit at the children's table near the front window after pickup while Robert finished whatever he was finishing. He was reviewing instrument logs for a cardiology clinic in Sugarland when the library's front door opened. Dr. Vanessa Reed was not dressed for a conference. She had on a coat and was carrying a paper bag from the sandwich place around the corner, and looked like someone who had made a deliberate decision to come here and was still working out, moment to moment, exactly what she was going to say when she arrived. She set the bag on the table. She said there was a turkey sandwich and something that might be a cookie, and that she had brought one for Clara too, in case she was around. Robert looked at the bag. He looked at her. She said she had been thinking about the calibration framework citation, that she wanted to have a direct conversation about what the company owed him for the use of a published methodology that had been foundational to their FDA submission, and that she wanted that conversation to happen before lawyers were involved rather than after, because she had a feeling the before version would go better for everyone. Robert said that was a reasonable instinct. She sat down across from him. Outside the reading room window, the afternoon was doing what Houston afternoons do in late spring, flat gold light off the buildings, the foot traffic shifting toward the end of the workday, kids from the elementary school appearing on the sidewalk in small clusters. Clara came through the front door at 3:22, in her yellow jacket, backpack on, scanning the room with the focused efficiency of a child who knows exactly who she's looking for. She found her father at the corner table and stopped when she saw there was someone else sitting across from him. She looked at Dr. Vanessa Reed with the direct, measuring look she applied to most new things. Dr. Vanessa Reed looked back at her. Clara put her backpack down, took out her sketchbook, and showed Vanessa the drawing from 4 days ago. The tall building with its careful rows of windows and the small figures inside them, each one placed with intention, one figure near an upper window slightly larger than the others, facing out. Vanessa looked at it without performing interest, because the interest was real. She said she thought the figure by the window was her favorite part. Clara considered this with the seriousness the observation deserved, then sat down, opened to a fresh page, and began drawing something new. She did not explain what it was. She rarely did. Robert watched his daughter draw. He thought about what Margaret Souza had said when she called the day after the summit, that what Vanessa Reed did well, she did completely, and that what she had identified as a failure in herself was something she would address in the same way she addressed technical problems, find the root cause and correct it at the source. He thought that was probably true. He thought it was worth finding out. He pulled the laptop back toward him, opened the instrument log, and went back to work in the particular quiet that belongs to someone who knows what they are doing and has stopped needing the room to confirm it. Clara's pencil moved steadily across the page beside him. Outside, the city was running the late afternoon version of itself, unhurried and indifferent, and entirely fine. Neither of those things felt like a problem anymore.